big government is over.
After we've done our job, and Jeff is our Republican nominee for Attorney General. So thanks for coming again, I appreciate it.
I'll try to be really brief. Mr. Kottkamp is somebody I never disagree with. He's very bright, but that's enough about Jackson. I read all this stuff on Facebook, your 5-year-old son. We're here for a very important race, and it's amazing how sometimes the federal races, there's a certain U.S. Senate race, it's always taking all the headlines, but more like the wind out of our sails. But what happens in Tallahassee affects us more than anything else, except for what happens in Broward County. But anyway, but what happens in Tallahassee, who our governor is when we redistrict next year is going to be critical. And who our Attorney General is, who's going to keep on the fight against the health care issue, against all these other issues, pain clinics, immigration issues. This is a man that can do all this stuff. You mentioned endorsements, Nick and Ed talked a little bit about it too. They're great. It's kind of like window dressing, and that's great to have. But when you have it, when you have support from folks like Sheriff Lamberti, and when you have support from these heroes that get to drive the Lieutenant Governor and the Governor and other folks around all the time, it's important because those are the people who are fighting to keep us safe, and at the federal level, obviously, to keep us free in the military. So we appreciate what they do, and those are the endorsements that really matter. But tell you something about Jeff Kottkamp, Lieutenant Governor, and when he's not around the governor, we just call him Governor. He's been somebody who has been a rock for conservative principles since the day we met. He's been a friend since the day we met, and he's somebody who's not going to run away from his party, or his principles, or his friends. And he's going to be our next Attorney General. I'm not going to talk about the other ones. I have no interest there. I've got one horse in this race. I want to give you our next Attorney General.
I don't really have anything else to say. These guys are so good. Nick, I don't know when you're running, but
I don't know about
very
that.
articulate spokesman for the campaign and the principles that we believe in. Thank you. Thank you for being here. And you know, this race, in most cycles, the Attorney General's race in Florida, you know, unless you're engaged in some ongoing criminal enterprise, maybe you don't care so much about the Attorney General's race. But think about this one. You know, the next Attorney General, as Chip said, carries on the fight against Obamacare. And Florida's leading the way. 19 other states are following Florida's lead. And, you know, they get in this debate all the time about whether it's the right way to do it or the wrong way to do it. It has nothing to do with health care. The litigation is simply about one thing. It's about our freedom. Does the Constitution mean what it says? The Constitution was established to give the federal government certain specific powers, and as the 10th Amendment says, everything else is reserved to the people and the states. That's what it's about. It's a moment in history, and we will look back, our children, our grandchildren will look at this moment in history and determine whether we did them right or we did them wrong. Did we pass on a freer, more prosperous country or not by what we do right now? Do we draw the line in the sand? Do we say to the federal government, no more? We're not letting you take over every aspect of our life and get further and further and further into our daily life. That's what the litigation is all about. The stakes are really that high. And as Chip said, you know, I've taken on the federal government in federal court before and beat them, and it probably doesn't surprise you to learn that they're very arrogant. Very arrogant. But you got to, you know, I look forward to the fight. I mean, if there was any evidence of their arrogance, it's what they've done to Arizona. And you realize Arizona has a violent drug war spilling across their borders. I mean, people are afraid to walk into their yards. Innocent people are being murdered every day. Phoenix is the #2 city in the world for kidnapping. That's the crime of choice for drug lords. And so what did Jan Brewer and the elected officials in Arizona do? First they said, hey, federal government, please do your job, secure the border. They didn't do it. So, you know, if you're an elected official in Arizona, they took an oath to protect the citizens of Arizona, so they took action. And demonstrating that arrogance of government, the federal government sues Arizona. It's remarkable. It's remarkable. I mean, here in Florida, we don't have, fortunately, the drug more spilling across our borders, but as taxpayers, you're certainly impacted by it every day. By illegal immigrants who have again broken the law, that are taking up space in our jails and our prisons, our emergency rooms. I mean, you're paying millions of dollars as taxpayers because of this issue, because of the failure of the federal government to do its job. And as your Attorney General, I'll sue the federal government to get your money back. If they're not going to secure the border, they should at least pay for their failure to do so. The next Attorney General has so many things on their plate. We've got the aftermath of the oil spill in the Gulf, and that's going to be a multi-year litigation to make sure that every small business owner is made whole, that every government, local government, is made whole from the damages they've incurred from this oil spill. We've got the issue with the EPA. They want to impose a water quality standard on Florida, and only Florida that's going to require us to more than double our property taxes. I don't think it's right to impose that burden on the taxpayers of Florida, to target the taxpayers of Florida, and I would challenge that too. I mean, the next Attorney General is going to be busy. A lot of challenges with the federal government, but that's the job. The job is not to warm a seat, and the last thing that we can afford right now is for on-the-job training, for somebody that needs a learning curve. You've got to go in there on day one. The next governor, attorney general, the entire cabinet will be new, and they all better know what they're doing. We don't have time for a learning curve with these issues. There are too many things happening that can impact our future and the generations that follow us. You know, when Nick was talking about the time for choosing, and that comes from a Ronald Reagan speech in 1964, but he's absolutely right. I mean, this is this generation's time for choosing. There is no doubt about it. The decisions that we make in this election cycle and the next election cycle are going to determine the fate of this country for the next 50 to 100 years, maybe forever. The stakes are really that high. It's one of those cycles, as you've heard Ed and Chip, I mean, this is a cycle where you have to contact everybody on your email list, everybody on your Christmas card list, everybody at work, at church, synagogue. If you've got a neighbor, and you both get home from work maybe a couple of times a week about the same time, and you typically just kind of wave from across the street politely, this is a cycle you got to walk across the street. And you got to tell them why you're voting, why the stakes are so high, why this is this generation's time for choosing, and you can't sit this one out. You can't sit this one out. You've got to get in the ring and fight for the future of this country. We have got to turn things around. We can only do it person by person. You know, Ed, when we were at Freedom Works, or DC Works for us, reminds me of this meeting as well. Because I know when you're in South Florida, sometimes you feel outnumbered. You feel like, well, there's so many more people from the other party than us. But there's still strength in numbers, and this meeting tonight is no different than what happened in the colonies in 1773, in 1774. People sitting around with shared values and a vision for freedom and liberty, and talking to one another about what can we do together? What can we do as a group to make sure that we seize liberty? You know, this is one of those times where I always think about, it's summed up so simply in Thomas Jefferson's quote, when the people are afraid of government, you have tyranny. When the government's afraid of the people, you have liberty. Let's make the government afraid of us, because after all, the government's supposed to work for us, not the other way around.